one of the assets that clients come to us with that is their most valuable asset is their home. And very often there are options with the home and home equity that people hear about, think about. Greg's an advocate. You can use your home as an asset in many, many ways. And one of the people that has pioneered this in New York State and worked closely with us in the Bar Association in New York is Frank Melia of Contour Mortgage. And with that, Frank, take it away.
Thank you, Lou. I'm the sponsor that paid for the breakfast. Thank you. My mother-in-law, Mickey, is 87 years old. And about 4 years ago, she started to show signs of memory loss, early set dementia. In February of 2022, last year, she broke her leg and she went into a rehab center and it amplified her dementia. She hasn't come home yet. She's now in the memory care side of a local care facility downstate where me and my wife live. And I tell you all this because being in this industry and working as an advocate for our aging population, I've had these conversations with my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, my wife, her brothers. But I was talking to some of the social workers outside this morning, and it's a difficult situation. It's a difficult conversation to have sometimes from a child to a parent. Because even my 80-year-old thick-headed Italian father finally did some planning, but whenever I would bring up the conversation, sometimes the conversation would just lead to, it's not something we want to discuss. So all the social workers in here and all of the care managers, I applaud you. I mean that sincerely. I prepared my mother-in-law and father-in-law because we saw what was starting to happen to her. But when it happened and it was amplified so fast, I've seen the emotional toll it's taken on my wife and my brother-in-laws. They're making decisions that are emotional. They're not making decisions that are maybe best sometimes for my mother-in-law, in my opinion. But as in, a son-in-law, I have a fine line. I want to help, but I don't see sometimes people making decisions, that are best sometimes. It's sometimes that it's a very emotional decision. So again, I compliment you all. We're all advocates. What we do at our division at Contour Mortgage is we offer a lot of different short-term and long-term funding solutions. Okay. I mean, we're a typical mortgage bank. We help people buy homes, refinance homes. But meeting Lou years ago, working with the New York State Bar Association and seeing what I've seen in the communities that I serve in, it's the entire state. Our bank really took a hold of coming up with programs that are user-friendly for the aging population. And what I mean by that is sometimes people own their homes jointly with their spouse or their brothers and sisters, obviously. But when you start to move the property into a life estate, people add their children because they want to protect the children they feel, or they do a living trust, or they do a Medicaid asset protection trust. That's where the banking system and the lending communities in this country really don't know. And it's nothing against the banking situation, the banking community, but they've never come across these types of situations often enough to address them. I was fortunate enough 15 years ago to really start to dive in with the New York State Bar Association and working with advocates like Lou's office and different law firms throughout the state. We've taken their input, we've taken their suggestions, and we've come up with programs that can help people age in their communities, like Greg alluded to. People don't want to go into care facilities. Nothing against the care facilities. They're a huge advocacy for our aging population, but people want to stay in their homes. So what we're able to do is provide different options for them. We don't move the house from the life estate. We don't tell them to take the house out of the trust. And nothing against community banks and nothing against community credit unions. But I get a lot of calls from up here in the capital region where they're trying to do some planning and they're trying to get some equity out of the property, but the lender is saying, all right, here's a deed. You got to take your house out of the trust. I'm always telling them, go back to the law firms, go back to the advocates that you work with, all of you, because we all know the ramifications of protecting an asset for 5 years and then maybe pulling that asset out of that trust. We've had a lot of situations up here in the capital region. We had a family recently that called us and they just really needed, dad was 90 years old and they just really needed to tap into some equity in the home. They've gone through most of the other assets at this point. I don't like I know it's crisis planning, and a lot of you expressed that to me outside this morning, but sometimes that's when I get involved, when it's to a point where they don't know where to get money. They don't know how to pay these bills. They don't know how to pay for your services. They don't know how to pay their real estate taxes. So all this family really needed was to tap in. We were able to get them a mortgage. The house was in the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust. And they just got that line of credit to pay their home health care agency, and to pay for some improvements to the home, ramps, accessibility, and things of that nature. We had another recent family up in the Saratoga region that actually did some planning, but her husband got very sick very fast. She didn't reach the 5-year look back period, so her home was open to a Medicaid claim. And she had to sell her house when her husband passed. The bill was over. She just wanted to pay that bill. So she had to sell her home that her and her husband lived in for 40 years. She owned an adjacent lot and her son was a builder. So she was able to scrap together some money afterwards, borrow some money from her son, and he was able to build her a new home. Okay. So when she called me, she needed the money to pay back her son. So she really just needed the money because we can only lend on real property. Okay, so they have to own real estate. It could be a co-op, it could be a condominium, it could be a single family to a 4-family home. We even have some expanded programs now if they're over 4 units. So, some people live in apartment buildings, not many, but if it's over 4 units, so those are the types of some of the cases that we work with. Being a sponsor now, I think it's my 5th or 6th year. I've made some good friendships. As Greg mentioned earlier, I commend Greg. I've also worked with Greg through his agency and Becky Prevey through her agency, just as an education part of it. Greg's done some Facebook Live events and they've done some webinars throughout the state. I come from an education background, simply meaning, I always feel that the more we educate our aging population, the more they'll understand what's available. Like Greg said, I'm in the private sector, and we're really not here. I've never, and I mean this sincerely, I've never sold someone a mortgage. I've always just educated them on their options, show them what is available. And if we don't have the best fit for them, we'll work with the local community banks, the local community credit unions, and we'll tell people, go to that community bank. I had a couple that called me about 2 weeks ago up here in this area, and he only needed $15,000. He needed some work on his septic system and he needed a new roof. Coming from a banking background, obviously most of my life, and there are costs, obviously, just like anything else, to take out a mortgage. It just didn't make sense, and I've done this many times over my 25 years, where to give them a reverse mortgage, which a lot of people ask for, or a 30-year fixed rate mortgage inside the trust. The closing costs and the cost to get that mortgage was more than the money that he needed. So I was able to just show him, like, me and my wife used this company called Lightstream. No plug for them. I don't get compensated by them. But they're just an online bank on the West Coast that they do personal loans up to $25,000. You can get approved online. It's not a lien against your property, so they don't care how your property is titled. So hopefully he took my advice, and that's like, and I commend Greg for his tireless advocacy for the aging population. But I consider myself an advocate as well. I had a family, I always tell this story, so if you've heard it before, I apologize. I had an attorney call me downstate about 5 years ago, said, you have to go see this family. I'm like, okay, when? He's like, now. Okay, so it's crisis planning. It was 5 daughters and their 90-year-old mother who has Alzheimer's. So I went to the house. If anyone's ever seen an old row house downstate where you walk into the front house, then you walk through every bedroom, you walk through it so I walked in, and a daughter met me at the front, and we walked in, and we walked in, and the mother jumped up. She was smiling. She held her face, and she asked me, how long are you in town with Dancing with the Stars? And if you know me, I'm not a dancer. I was a football player. But working with families that have had memory loss up to that point, I was taking off my overcoat because it was the winter. I held out my hand. She jumped out of the chair, came over to me. She held my hand, and I don't know, walked around the room for about 3-4 seconds and sat her back down. When I looked up, all the daughters were just bawling. They were crying. And they told me that she hadn't spoken in like 2 years. She was a dancer when she was a kid. So that was 2014. That's when I really became an advocate. I mean, I've always fought and been an advocate for our aging population, But I was able to get that family had their 4-family home in a Medicaid asset protection trust. They refused to put her into a care facility. And I was able to get them a reverse mortgage line of credit, and they were able to keep her in that house. I work with a lot of social workers, and one of the social workers downstate where I am came up with this loan toolbox. Actually, Brian Tully's in our audience today, and I met her with an event that we do at Tully Law. And she came up with this elder law toolbox, and I think Brian came up with the concept too. And it's a simple concept that I think all social workers should really, work with, meaning, we're all part of this toolbox. I'm the financial tool in that toolbox to help people get their finances in order. And I also came up with, working with care managers and working with social workers, I came up with a financial assessment document. So if anyone wants to get a hold of me afterwards or give me a call, it's really, I saw it with my mother-in-law. She's in this care facility now for almost 2 years, and we're still finding documents in her closet. I mean, my father-in-law was like, what is this? I'm like, that's an annuity with like $2,000 in it. And I say it jokingly, but I mean it sincerely, because people don't, you might do a care assessment, you might do a health assessment, you might do a how to live in the community assessment, but the financial side is a tough conversation, especially between child and parent. So just through all my experiences over the past 20 years, I've put together this document which just pulls together more of their financial profile. So when the children need to know where things are, and when they need to sit down with a law firm like Lou's, or sit down with a law firm like Brian's, or sit down and go over their finances and their needs, they'll know where everything is. It's a very important part of the puzzle. I just want to finish by saying, like I said, I've told you some stories this morning, but you're all advocates for our aging population, and working with the state agencies, and education is key. Let's keep our aging population in their homes. Let's keep them safe. And if anybody needs, I do a lot of webinars, I do a lot of educational based events with the social workers, their staff, and law firms. So if anybody needs anything, just reach out. I'm always available. And if, I work with the local appraisers, so don't worry about my address because it's downstate. I've helped people up in Lake Placid. I've helped people throughout the entire state. We work with the local vendors like yourselves. And we know a lot, we know how to handle every community here in New York State. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much.